can't believe this is happening.
I'm sorry, these are the official findings.
The $50,000 check slipped from Sarah Martinez's trembling fingers and fluttered to the sterile hospital floor like a fallen leaf, landing at the feet of the very same doctors who had been mocking her worn-out scrubs just moments before. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the steady beep of heart monitors and the distant hum of the air conditioning system that had witnessed countless stories within the walls of St. Mary's General Hospital in downtown Chicago. But let's rewind 12 hours to understand how a 28-year-old night shift nurse from the South Side, whose greatest possession was a 15-year-old Honda Civic with a cracked windshield, came to be standing in the marble-floored executive conference room of one of America's most prestigious medical centers, holding what would amount to more money than she'd ever seen in her entire life. Sarah had arrived at St. Mary's General that Tuesday evening with the same quiet determination that had carried her through 3 years of nursing school while working double shifts at a local diner. Her uniform, a faded set of navy blue scrubs that she'd bought secondhand from a thrift store in Pilsen, had seen better days. The fabric was thin from countless washings, and there was a small stain near the left pocket that no amount of bleach could remove, a permanent reminder of a particularly chaotic night when a patient had thrown his dinner tray in frustration. But Sarah wore those scrubs with dignity, because they represented something precious to her, the culmination of a dream that had seemed impossible when she was growing up in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment with her mother and 3 younger siblings. If you're enjoying this story of transformation and unexpected kindness, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss these inspiring tales that remind us of the power of compassion in our everyday lives. The evening shift was supposed to be routine. Sarah clocked in at exactly 7 p.m., her worn sneakers squeaking softly against the polished linoleum as she made her way to the nurses' station on the 4th floor. The pediatric ward was her domain, a place where her gentle voice and patient demeanor had earned her the love of countless children and the grudging respect of their worried parents. But respect from her colleagues, that was a different story entirely.
"Look who decided to grace us with her presence," Dr. Richard Blackwood called out as Sarah approached the central desk. His voice carried that particular tone of condescension that seemed to be taught in medical school alongside anatomy and pharmacology. Dr. Blackwood was one of those physicians who wore his Harvard Medical School credentials like a designer suit, constantly reminding everyone within earshot of his prestigious background and his family's connections to Chicago's medical elite. Standing beside him were Dr. Jennifer Walsh and Dr. Marcus Thompson, both of whom had learned to mirror their senior colleagues' attitude toward the nursing staff, particularly toward those who didn't fit their image of what a healthcare professional should look like. "That uniform looks like it survived a natural disaster," Dr. Walsh added with a laugh that was meant to sound playful but carried a sharp edge of cruelty. "Sarah, honey, don't they pay you enough to buy clothes that actually fit this century?" Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against the counter as she spoke, each tap seeming to emphasize her point. Dr. Walsh's own appearance was immaculate. Designer scrubs that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly grocery budget. Hair styled in a perfect bob that never seemed to move despite the 12-hour shifts. And makeup applied with precision that would make a television news anchor jealous. Sarah felt the familiar heat of embarrassment rise in her cheeks, but she kept her eyes focused on the patient charts in front of her. She had learned long ago that responding to their taunts only encouraged them further. "I'm here to work," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. "Room 412 needs their medication, and the Johnson family has been asking about their son's test results." "Oh, the Johnson family," Dr. Thompson chimed in, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. The ones who specifically asked if they could have a different nurse? Something about wanting someone who looks more professional? He made air quotes around the last word, and Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. She knew the Johnsons had never said any such thing. They had actually thanked her personally just the day before for her kindness to their 8-year-old son who was recovering from appendix surgery. But she also knew that contradicting Dr. Thompson would only make things worse.
The other nurses at the station had grown quiet, some looking away in discomfort, while others seemed to find the interaction mildly entertaining. Sarah recognized the dynamic all too well. In places like St. Mary's General, where hierarchy was everything and appearances mattered almost as much as credentials, someone like her, a first-generation Mexican-American woman who had worked her way through school and whose accent still carried traces of her grandmother's Spanish, would always be an easy target for those who felt the need to assert their superiority. Maybe if you spent less time on charity cases and more time on your appearance, people might take you more seriously, Dr. Blackwood continued, apparently warming up to his topic. This is a prestigious hospital, Sarah. We have a reputation to maintain. When patients see someone who looks like she wandered in from the street, it reflects poorly on all of us. Sarah's hands tightened slightly around the patient files, but her voice remained calm. I understand your concerns, Dr. Blackwood. I'll make sure to address them appropriately. It was a diplomatic response that said nothing while acknowledging everything, a skill she had perfected over years of dealing with difficult situations. But Dr. Blackwood wasn't finished. Something about Sarah's quiet dignity seemed to irritate him further, as if her refusal to be completely broken down by their comments was a personal affront to his authority. You know what, Sarah? I think we need to have a more serious conversation about professional standards around here. Everyone, gather around for a minute. The night shift nurses began to drift over reluctantly, their faces showing varying degrees of discomfort. Some of them genuinely liked Sarah and appreciated her work ethic, but none were willing to risk their own standing by defending her against the doctor's attacks. In the complex ecosystem of hospital politics, job security trumped personal loyalty more often than not. What happened next would be seared into Sarah's memory forever, replaying in her mind during the sleepless hours that followed. Dr. Blackwood positioned himself directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne and see the smug satisfaction in his pale blue eyes. I want everyone to take a good look at what not to do if you want to succeed in this profession, he announced, his voice carrying clearly across the nurses' station. This is exactly the kind of presentation that makes patients uncomfortable and reflects poorly on our entire institution. He gestured dramatically at Sarah's appearance, from her faded scrubs to her simple ponytail to her discount store sneakers. In a hospital like St. Mary's, we maintain certain standards. Our patients expect to see healthcare professionals who look the part, who command respect through their appearance as much as their skills. When someone shows up looking like they can't even afford proper work clothes, it undermines the confidence that patients need to have in their care. Take a moment to think about what you would do in Sarah's situation. Would you speak up and defend yourself, or would you stay quiet to keep your job? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if you're touched by Sarah's story so far. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Sarah felt every pair of eyes in the area focusing on her with uncomfortable intensity. A few of the younger nurses looked genuinely distressed by the public humiliation they were witnessing, while others seemed fascinated by the drama unfolding before them. The patients' family members who were present in the waiting area had begun to notice the commotion, and Sarah could see them whispering among themselves and pointing in her direction. Furthermore, Dr. Blackwood continued, apparently emboldened by the attention he was receiving, I think it's time we address the elephant in the room. This hospital serves some of the most affluent families in Chicago. When they bring their children here, they expect to see staff members who reflect the caliber of care they're paying for. They don't want to wonder if their nurse can even afford to take proper care of herself, let alone their child. Sarah's vision blurred slightly as tears threatened to form, but she blinked them back with fierce determination. She had endured worse than this, much worse, during her childhood in one of Chicago's roughest neighborhoods. She had survived her father leaving when she was 12, had worked 3 jobs while studying for her nursing boards, had stayed up countless nights caring for her sick mother while somehow managing to maintain her grades. She would not let these privileged doctors see her break down, no matter how much their words stung. I take excellent care of all my patients, Sarah said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying a strength that surprised even her. My appearance doesn't change the quality of care I provide, or the compassion I show to families during their most difficult moments. Dr. Walsh laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Compassion doesn't pay the bills, sweetie, and it certainly doesn't inspire confidence in parents who are trusting you with their children's lives. Maybe you'd be more suited to a community clinic, or somewhere that your background would be more appropriate. The casual cruelty of the comment took Sarah's breath away. The implication was clear. Someone like her didn't belong in a place like St. Mary's General, serving families who could afford the best health care money could buy. Her background, code for her ethnicity, her economic status, her accent, everything that made her different from the doctors who seemed to glide effortlessly through the hospital's halls, was being used as a weapon against her professional competence. But even as the humiliation washed over her in waves, Sarah noticed something that the doctors had missed in their eagerness to tear her down. Standing near the elevator bank, partially obscured by a large potted plant, and speaking quietly into his cell phone, was a man in an expensive dark suit who had been watching the entire interaction with growing intensity. His silver hair was perfectly styled. His posture spoke of authority and wealth, and there was something in his expression that suggested he was taking careful note of everything being said. Sarah didn't recognize him, but several of the nurses had noticed him too, and she caught fragments of whispered conversations. "Is that? What's he doing here so late? Oh my God, if he heard all of that!" The man finished his phone call and approached the nurses' station with measured steps, his Italian leather shoes silent on the polished floor. As he drew closer, Sarah could see the expensive cut of his suit, the platinum watch on his wrist, and most importantly, the unmistakable air of someone who was accustomed to being the most important person in any room he entered. Dr. Blackwood was still in the middle of his impromptu lecture about professional standards when the man cleared his throat softly. The sound was barely audible, but it carried enough authority to immediately stop all conversation. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't the uncomfortable quiet of witnesses to humiliation, but the hushed reverence that automatically accompanies the presence of real power. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice calm but carrying an undertone that suggested he was not accustomed to being ignored. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation about professional standards and patient care." Dr. Blackwood turned around with the confident smile of someone who assumed he was about to receive praise for his leadership in maintaining hospital protocol. Yes, sir. We were just discussing the importance of maintaining appropriate professional appearance standards with our nursing staff. It's critical for maintaining patient confidence and— I'm sorry, the man interrupted gently, but I don't believe we've been formally introduced. He extended his hand with the kind of practiced courtesy that spoke of countless boardroom meetings and charity galas. I'm William Hartwell. The name hit the assembled group like a lightning bolt. William Hartwell III, heir to the Hartwell Medical Group fortune, owner of not just St. Mary's General, but a network of 17 hospitals across the Midwest, and one of the most influential figures in American healthcare. His great-grandfather had built the first Hartwell Hospital in 1923, and the family name was synonymous with medical excellence and innovative patient care. Forbes magazine had recently estimated his personal net worth at just over $2 billion, making him one of the wealthiest men in Illinois. Dr. Blackwood's confident expression crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. His face went through a rapid series of transformations: confusion, recognition, horror, and finally a kind of desperate panic as the implications of the situation became clear. He had just publicly humiliated a member of his staff in front of the man who owned the hospital, the man who could end his career with a single phone call, the man whose opinion could determine the future of everyone present. "Mr. Hartwell," Dr. Blackwood stammered, his voice suddenly hoarse, "I had no idea. We weren't expecting. That is to say, if we had known you were here." He trailed off helplessly, apparently unable to construct a coherent sentence under the weight of his own rapidly sinking career prospects. William Hartwell's attention, however, was no longer focused on the doctors. His gaze had shifted to Sarah, who stood frozen in place like a deer caught in headlights. She had heard of William Hartwell, of course. Every employee of St. Mary's General knew the name of the man who signed their paychecks, even if most had never seen him in person. But she had never imagined she would meet him under circumstances like these, standing in the wreckage of her professional reputation while wearing her threadbare scrubs and fighting back tears of humiliation. "Miss," Hartwell prompted gently, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed completely at odds with the coldness that had dominated the conversation just moments before. "Martinez," Sarah managed to say, her voice barely audible. "Sarah Martinez." "Miss Martinez," Hartwell repeated, as if testing the sound of her name. "I wonder if I might have a word with you privately. There's something I'd like to discuss." The request sent a ripple of shock through the assembled group. Several of the nurses exchanged meaningful looks, while the doctors seemed frozen in various states of panic and confusion. In the rigid hierarchy of hospital life, the idea of the owner wanting to speak privately with a staff nurse was so unprecedented that nobody seemed quite sure how to react. Sarah felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she nodded mutely. She couldn't imagine what William Hartwell might want to discuss with her, but she was certain it couldn't be good. She had just been publicly humiliated by his hospital's senior physicians, had been essentially told she wasn't good enough to work at his prestigious institution, and now the man who could fire her with a snap of his fingers wanted a private conversation. The most likely scenario, she figured, was that he would ask for her resignation in a more discreet sang, sparing both of them the awkwardness of another public scene. "Dr. Blackwood," Hartwell said without turning away from Sarah, his voice carrying just enough ice to freeze the Mississippi River in July, "I believe you and your colleagues have patients to attend to. I trust you'll remember our conversation about professional standards." The dismissal was polite but unmistakable, and the doctors scattered like leaves in a strong wind, suddenly discovering urgent matters that required their immediate attention elsewhere in the hospital. Within moments, the nurses' station had emptied except for Sarah and William Hartwell, standing face to face in the fluorescent glow of the overhead lights. "Ms. Martinez," Hartwell began, his voice gentle but serious, "I want you to know that what I just witnessed is completely unacceptable and does not reflect the values that this hospital was founded on. No employee should ever be subjected to that kind of treatment, regardless of their position or background." Sarah stared at him in confusion, unsure how to respond. This was not the conversation she had been expecting. Instead of criticism or termination, she was hearing what sounded almost like an apology from one of the most powerful men in Chicago. "I've been walking through the hospital tonight, as I do periodically, observing our operations and talking with staff and patients," Hartwell continued. "What I've seen and heard has been quite illuminating, particularly regarding your work with our pediatric patients." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "The Johnson family, whose son is recovering from appendix surgery, made a point of stopping me in the hallway 20 minutes ago. They wanted to tell me about a nurse named Sarah who had gone above and beyond to comfort their child during a particularly difficult night. They said she had stayed with him for hours, even after her shift officially ended, because he was scared and asking for his parents who couldn't be there." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. She remembered that night vividly. Little Tommy Johnson had woken up crying and disoriented after his surgery, and his parents had been stuck in traffic due to a massive accident on the interstate. She had simply done what felt natural, sat beside his bed, held his hand, and told him stories until his parents arrived. It had never occurred to her that the family would mention it to anyone, let alone to William Hartwell himself. "They also mentioned," Hartwell continued, "that you had noticed Tommy was having an allergic reaction to one of his medications before any of the doctors caught it, and that your quick thinking may have prevented a serious complication." The memory of that incident made Sarah's cheeks flush with embarrassment rather than pride. She had noticed the subtle changes in Tommy's breathing and skin color that indicated an allergic reaction and had immediately called for Dr. Thompson. But instead of being praised for her observation skills, she had been lectured about overstepping her bounds and creating unnecessary alarm when the reaction turned out to be relatively mild. "Mr. Hartwell," Sarah said quietly, "I was just doing my job. Any nurse would have noticed those symptoms." "Would they?" Hartwell asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because according to the incident report I reviewed, 2 different residents had checked on Tommy in the hours before you noticed the reaction, and neither of them caught it. Your attention to detail may have saved that child from a trip to intensive care." He took a step closer, and Sarah could see something in his eyes that she couldn't quite identify. A mixture of curiosity, concern, and what might have been respect. "Tell me, Ms. Martinez, how long have you been working at St. Mary's?" 3 years, sir," Sarah replied, still uncertain where this conversation was heading. "And in those 3 years, have you always been treated the way I witnessed tonight?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Sarah wasn't sure she was prepared to address. She thought about all the small humiliations she had endured, all the times her suggestions had been dismissed or her contributions minimized, all the occasions when she had been made to feel like she didn't belong in the gleaming halls of St. Mary's General. But she also thought about her paycheck, her family's dependence on her income, and the precarious nature of her position in the hospital's hierarchy. She began, then stopped, unsure how honest she should be with a man who could alter the trajectory of her entire career with a single decision. Hartwell seemed to understand her hesitation. "Miss Martinez, I want you to know that whatever you tell me will be held in complete confidence. I'm not asking you to file a formal complaint or to name names. I'm simply trying to understand the culture of my own hospital, and I have a feeling you might be able to provide some insight that I wouldn't get from the usual channels." There was something in his tone that convinced Sarah of his sincerity, a gentleness that seemed genuine rather than calculated. She took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. "It's not always this bad," she said finally. "Most of the time, it's more subtle. Comments about my background, suggestions that I might be more comfortable working somewhere else, assumptions about what I can or can't handle based on how I look or where I come from. Tonight was worse than usual." Hartwell nodded slowly, his expression growing more serious with each word. "And do you enjoy your work here, despite these challenges?" "I love nursing," Sarah replied without hesitation. "I love working with children, helping families through difficult times, being part of something that matters. This hospital has amazing resources and the opportunity to help so many people. It's just that you shouldn't have to endure discrimination and humiliation as the price of admission," Hartwell finished for her. Sarah looked up at him in surprise. The word discrimination hung in the air between them, giving a name to experiences she had always struggled to articulate. She had known that her treatment was unfair, had felt the sting of prejudice and classism, but having someone in William Hartwell's position acknowledge it openly was both validating and terrifying. If you're moved by this story of standing up against workplace discrimination, please hit that like button and let us know in the comments what you think should happen next. "Miss Martinez," Hartwell said, his voice taking on a more formal tone, "I'd like to offer you something, but first I need to ask you a question. If you could design the perfect working environment for a pediatric nurse, if you could create a place where your skills and compassion would be valued above all else, what would that look like?" The question caught Sarah completely off guard. She had spent so much time trying to survive in her current environment that she had rarely allowed herself to dream about what an ideal situation might look like. But as she thought about it, the answer came to her with surprising clarity. "I would want to work somewhere that children and families felt safe and welcomed, regardless of their background or their ability to pay," she said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "Somewhere that the focus was on healing and compassion rather than status and appearances. A place where nurses were respected as partners in patient care, where our observations and insights were valued because we often spend more time with patients than anyone else on the medical team." She paused, realizing she might be revealing too much about her frustrations with the current system, but Hartwell was nodding encouragingly. "I would want to work with doctors who saw nursing as a profession worthy of respect, who understood that good patient care requires teamwork and communication rather than hierarchy and intimidation," she continued. "And I would want to be somewhere that families like mine, families who have to choose between paying for medicine and paying for groceries, could receive the same quality of care as the wealthiest patients." When she finished speaking, there was a long moment of silence. Sarah worried that she had overstepped, that her vision of healthcare was too idealistic for someone like William Hartwell to take seriously. But when he spoke again, there was something in his voice that she hadn't expected. "Miss Martinez," he said quietly, "what would you say if I told you that place already exists and that I'd like you to help me run it?" Sarah stared at him in complete bewilderment. "I'm sorry, what?" Hartwell smiled, and for the first time since their conversation began, he looked genuinely excited about something. 3 months ago, I purchased a struggling community hospital on the south side of Chicago. It's called Mercy General, and it primarily serves low-income families and uninsured patients. The previous owners had run it into the ground, outdated equipment, demoralized staff, and a reputation for substandard care. He began pacing slightly as he spoke, his enthusiasm growing with each word. I've been looking for the right person to help me transform it into something special. Not just another charity hospital, but a place that provides world-class health care to people who have never had access to it before. I want to create a model that proves excellent medicine doesn't have to be exclusive medicine. Sarah felt dizzy as she tried to process what she was hearing. Mr. Hartwell, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure I understand what you're asking me to do. I'm just a staff nurse. I don't have experience running a hospital or managing budgets or— You have something more valuable than administrative experience, Hartwell interrupted. You have the heart for this kind of work, and you understand the community we'd be serving because you come from that community. You know what it's like to worry about whether you can afford health care, to feel judged by medical professionals based on your appearance or your address. He stopped pacing and looked directly at her. I'm offering you the position of Director of Nursing at Mercy General, with complete authority over nursing staff, patient care protocols, and staff development. You'd be working with me to rebuild the entire culture of the hospital from the ground up. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Director of Nursing was a position she had never even dreamed of aspiring to, a level of responsibility and authority that seemed impossibly far removed from her current reality. The idea that someone like William Hartwell would offer such a role to someone like her was so far outside her frame of reference that she couldn't quite process it as real. I can't, she said automatically, the response born of years of conditioning that had taught her to view herself as unworthy of significant opportunities. I don't have the qualifications. I don't have a master's degree or management experience or— You have 3 years of excellent patient care, recognition from families for your compassion and skill, and the respect of your colleagues despite facing constant discrimination, Hartwell said firmly. And you have something that can't be taught in graduate school, the ability to see patients as human beings rather than case studies or revenue streams. Sarah felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of humiliation. She was overwhelmed by a mixture of hope, fear, and disbelief that was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The possibility that her career could take such a dramatic turn, that she could move from being the target of discrimination to being in a position to prevent others from experiencing the same treatment, was almost too much to comprehend. The salary, Hartwell continued, would be $150,000 per year to start, with full benefits, education assistance if you decide to pursue additional degrees, and a generous budget for staff development and patient care initiatives. The number made Sarah's head spin. $150,000 was more than 4 times what she currently made, enough to move her family out of their cramped apartment, to pay off her student loans, to give her siblings opportunities she had never been able to provide before. It was enough to transform not just her life, but the lives of everyone she cared about. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You could hire someone with much more experience, someone who already has the credentials and the background that people would respect." Hartwell was quiet for a long moment, seeming to consider his answer carefully. "Because," he said finally, "I've spent the last 30 years of my life surrounded by people who tell me what they think I want to hear. I've sat through countless meetings with hospital administrators and department heads who present carefully crafted reports about patient satisfaction and quality metrics, all while ignoring the human cost of our healthcare system." He gestured back toward the area where the confrontation with the doctors had taken place. "Tonight, I saw something that reminded me why I went into healthcare in the first place. I saw someone who was being treated poorly, not because of her competence or her dedication, but because of prejudices and assumptions that have no place in medicine. And I saw that same person maintain her dignity and professionalism even while being publicly humiliated." Sarah felt her cheeks burning with a mixture of embarrassment and something else she couldn't quite identify. The idea that William Hartwell had been impressed by her behavior during what she considered one of the most mortifying experiences of her professional life was difficult to process. "More importantly," Hartwell continued, "I've spent the evening talking to patients and families, and your name came up repeatedly. Not just from the Johnsons, but from at least 6 other families who wanted to make sure I knew about the exceptional care you had provided. They talked about how you remembered their children's names, how you took time to explain procedures in terms they could understand, how you advocated for their needs even when it put you at odds with the medical staff." He smiled at the memory. "One father told me that when his daughter was admitted for pneumonia, you noticed that she seemed withdrawn and scared. Instead of just administering her medication and moving on, you took the time to learn that she was worried about her pet hamster at home. You arranged for her mother to bring in a photo of the hamster and helped her make a get well card to leave by the hamster's cage. It was a small gesture, but it transformed that child's entire hospital experience." Sarah remembered the incident well. 8-year-old Maria Gonzalez had been admitted during a particularly busy night shift, and something about her silence and the way she clutched her stuffed animal had reminded Sarah of her own childhood fears during her mother's hospitalizations. The intervention had taken maybe 10 minutes of her time, but seeing Maria's face light up when her mother brought the photo the next day had made it feel like the most important 10 minutes of her week. "That's the kind of nursing that changes lives," Hartwell said. "That's the kind of care I want to build an entire hospital around. Not just treating symptoms, but treating people with dignity and compassion." Sarah found herself struggling to speak through the emotion that was building in her chest. The idea that someone had not only noticed her efforts, but valued them enough to offer her an opportunity like this was overwhelming in ways she couldn't have anticipated. "Mr. Hartwell," she said finally, "I'm honored by your offer, and I'm grateful for your confidence in me. But I need you to understand something about my background. I grew up in the kind of neighborhood that Mercy General serves. My mother cleaned offices at night to pay for our health care. I've been on the other side of this system, and I know what it feels like to be judged and dismissed based on your zip code or your insurance status." She took a deep breath, knowing that her next words could potentially change Hartwell's mind about her suitability for the position. "If you hire me, I won't just be trying to improve patient care in general. I'll be fighting for every family that gets treated like they don't matter because they can't afford to pay full price for their health care. I'll be challenging doctors and administrators and anyone else who tries to provide second-class care to first-class human beings." Instead of looking concerned by her passion, Hartwell's smile grew wider. "Miss Martinez, that's exactly why I want you for this position. The healthcare industry needs more people who understand that excellence in medicine isn't just about having the latest equipment or the most prestigious doctors. It's about treating every patient with the same level of care and respect, regardless of their ability to pay." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, which he handed to her with ceremonial gravity. "I'd like you to visit Mercy General this weekend, meet with the current staff, and see what we're working with. Take your time to think about the offer, talk it over with your family, and let me know your decision by next Friday." Sarah took the card with trembling fingers, noting the elegant letterhead and the personal phone number handwritten on the back. The physical weight of the card seemed insignificant compared to the weight of the opportunity it represented. "There's one more thing," Hardwell said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "What happened here tonight, the way you were treated by Dr. Blackwood and his colleagues, that was completely unacceptable, and there will be consequences. I want you to know that even if you decide not to take the position at Mercy General, changes will be made here at St. Mary's to ensure that no employee ever has to endure that kind of treatment again." The promise of accountability sent a mixture of satisfaction and anxiety through Sarah's mind. Part of her was glad that the doctor's behavior would have repercussions, but another part of her worried about the potential for retaliation if she remained at St. Mary's. "What kind of consequences?" she asked, curious despite herself. Hartwell's expression grew cold, in a way that reminded Sarah exactly who she was talking to. "Dr. Blackwood will be meeting with Human Resources tomorrow morning to discuss his future employment with the Hartwell Medical Group. Discrimination and harassment are grounds for immediate termination, regardless of someone's medical credentials or family connections." Sarah felt a flutter of panic. "Mr. Hartwell, I don't want anyone to lose their job because of what happened tonight. I know Dr. Blackwood was out of line, but—" "Miss Martinez," Hartwell interrupted gently but firmly, "this isn't about punishment. It's about maintaining standards of professional conduct that reflect our values as an institution. Dr. Blackwood's behavior tonight was not an isolated incident. I've been hearing similar complaints for months, and what I witnessed was simply the final straw." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "A hospital is only as good as its culture, and culture is determined by what behavior is tolerated and what behavior is addressed. If I allow senior physicians to publicly humiliate nursing staff based on their economic background or appearance, then I'm sending a message to every employee about what we really value here." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps, and they both turned to see Dr. Thompson walking hesitantly in their direction. His face was pale, and there was a nervous energy in his movements that suggested he was deeply uncomfortable with whatever mission had brought him back to the nurses' station. "Mr. Hartwell," Dr. Thompson said, his voice carefully controlled, "I wanted to apologize for the earlier misunderstanding. I think there may have been some confusion about professional protocols, and I want to assure you that we all have the utmost respect for our nursing staff." Sarah watched the interaction with fascination. The transformation in Dr. Thompson's demeanor was so complete that he seemed like an entirely different person from the man who had been mocking her appearance just an hour earlier. The arrogance and condescension had been replaced by nervous deference, and his carefully chosen words suggested that someone had advised him on damage control strategies. Hartwell's response was polite but cool. "Dr. Thompson, I appreciate your concern. However, I think the situation was quite clear rather than confusing. Perhaps you could use your time more productively by focusing on patient care." The dismissal was unmistakable, and Dr. Thompson retreated with obvious relief. Sarah realized that word of Hartwell's presence and his private conversation with her had spread throughout the hospital with the speed of light, and that everyone involved in the earlier incident was probably scrambling to minimize their potential liability. "I should let you get back to your patients," Hartwell said, turning his attention back to Sarah. "But before I go, I want to give you something." He reached into his jacket pocket again, this time pulling out what appeared to be a folded check. Sarah's eyes widened as he handed it to her, unsure what to expect. "This is a personal gift," he said, "not connected to the job offer or to anything else. It's simply a token of my appreciation for the kind of healthcare professional you are, and my apology for the treatment you received tonight." Sarah unfolded the check with trembling hands, and the number written there made her gasp out loud. $50,000, written in William Hartwell's distinctive handwriting, payable to Sarah Martinez. It was more money than she had ever seen in one place, more than her entire annual salary, enough to pay off her student loans and still have enough left over to move her family into a decent apartment. "Mr. Hartwell, I can't accept this," she stammered, trying to hand the check back to him. "This is too much. I haven't done anything to deserve." "You've shown more professionalism and grace under pressure than some people manage in an entire career," Hartwell interrupted. "And you've provided exceptional care to our patients, despite facing obstacles that never should have existed in the first place. Consider it a signing bonus, regardless of your decision about the position at Mercy General." Sarah stared at the check, her mind reeling. The numbers seemed to swim before her eyes as she tried to process the reality of what was happening. Just hours earlier, she had been dreading another night of subtle discrimination and professional humiliation. Now, she was holding a check that would fundamentally change her family's financial situation, and considering a job offer that could transform her entire career trajectory. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Say you'll think about the offer," Hartwell replied with a gentle smile. "Say you'll visit Mercy General this weekend and see if it feels like a place where you could make a difference. And say you'll remember that there are people in positions of power who recognize your worth, even when others fail to see it." The sound of approaching voices made them both look toward the elevator bank, where a group of night shift nurses were returning from their break. Sarah quickly folded the check and slipped it into her pocket, suddenly aware that their private conversation was about to become public knowledge if they weren't careful. "I should go," Hartwell said, understanding the dynamic immediately. "But, Ms. Martinez, I hope you'll seriously consider my offer. Healthcare needs more people like you in leadership positions." As he walked toward the elevator, Sarah watched him go with a mixture of gratitude, disbelief, and overwhelming anxiety about the decisions she would need to make in the coming days. The weight of the check in her pocket felt both thrilling and terrifying, a tangible reminder that her life had just taken a turn she could never have anticipated. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of routine tasks and racing thoughts. Every time she checked on a patient or administered medication, she found herself thinking about what it would mean to be in charge of an entire nursing staff, to have the authority to implement the kind of compassionate care protocols she had always dreamed about. The responsibility seemed enormous, but so did the opportunity to make a real difference in the lives of patients and families who had been overlooked by the mainstream healthcare system. When she finally clocked out at 7 a.m., Sarah made her way to the parking garage with uncharacteristic speed, eager to escape the curious stares and whispered conversations that had followed her throughout the night. Word of her private meeting with William Hartwell had spread through the hospital with predictable efficiency, and she had fielded dozens of questions from colleagues who were desperately curious about what the billionaire hospital owner had wanted to discuss with a staff nurse. Her Honda Civic looked even more pathetic than usual in the gleaming parking garage, its rusted bumper and cracked windshield standing out starkly among the luxury vehicles driven by the medical staff. But as she settled into the worn driver's seat and pulled the check from her pocket, Sarah realized that this might be one of the last times she would feel embarrassed by her car or her circumstances. The drive home to her family's apartment in Pilsen took her through some of Chicago's most economically diverse neighborhoods, from the affluent area around St. Mary's General to the working-class communities where she had grown up. As she navigated the familiar streets, Sarah found herself seeing everything with new eyes. The community health clinic where her mother had taken them for checkups when they couldn't afford a private doctor. The pharmacy where they had sometimes had to put prescriptions on payment plans. The apartment buildings where families like hers struggled to make ends meet while still trying to maintain their dignity and hope for something better. These were the people who would be served by Mercy General, Sarah realized. These were the families who deserved the same quality of health care as the wealthy patients at St. Mary's, but who had been systematically excluded from it by economics and prejudice. The opportunity to advocate for them, to create an environment where they would be treated with respect and compassion, felt like both a tremendous privilege and a sacred responsibility. When she finally pulled into the parking lot of her family's apartment complex, Sarah sat in her car for several minutes, trying to organize her thoughts before facing her mother and siblings. How could she possibly explain what had happened without sounding like she was making up an elaborate fantasy? How could she convey the magnitude of the opportunity she was being offered without creating unrealistic expectations? The apartment was quiet when she entered, with her 3 younger siblings already off to school and her mother, Elena, preparing to leave for her job as a hotel housekeeper. Elena Martinez had worked multiple jobs for as long as Sarah could remember, sacrificing her own dreams and opportunities to ensure that her children had chances she had never received. The lines around her eyes spoke of years of worry and exhaustion, but her smile when she saw Sarah was as warm as ever. "Mija, you look different this morning," Elena said in Spanish, studying her daughter's face with the perceptive gaze of a mother who had learned to read subtle changes in mood and expression. "Something happened at work?" Sarah sat down at their small kitchen table, still trying to find the words to explain the surreal events of the previous night. "Mama, something incredible happened, but I need you to sit down because it's going to sound unbelievable." Elena poured 2 cups of coffee and settled into the chair across from Sarah, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "Are you in trouble? Did someone complain about your work?" "No, Mama, nothing like that." Sarah took a deep breath and pulled out the check, placing it on the table between them. "I need to tell you about a conversation I had with William Hartwell." Elena's eyes widened as she recognized the name. Even someone who didn't work in healthcare knew about the Hartwell family and their influence in Chicago's medical community. "The rich man who owns the hospital? What would he want with you?" Sarah began to recount the events of the previous evening, starting with the humiliation she had endured from the doctors and ending with Hartwell's unexpected job offer and the check that still seemed too surreal to be real. Elena listened in silence, her expression cycling through disbelief, anger at the treatment her daughter had received, and finally amazement at the opportunity being presented. When Sarah finished speaking, Elena picked up the check with trembling hands, staring at the number as if it might disappear if she looked away. $50,000, she whispered. "Sarah, this is enough to change everything for our family." "I know, Mama, but the job offer is even more important. Director of nursing at a hospital that serves families like ours, with a salary that would let us move out of here and give the kids opportunities they've never had before." Elena set the check down carefully and looked directly at her daughter. "What are you afraid of, Mija?" The question caught Sarah off guard, though she realized it shouldn't have. Her mother had always been able to see through her defenses and identify the fears she tried to hide, even from herself. "I'm afraid I'm not qualified," Sarah admitted. "I'm afraid I'll take this position and fail, and then everyone will say that they were right about people like us not belonging in places of power and responsibility." Elena was quiet for a long moment, sipping her coffee and studying her daughter's face. When she spoke again, her voice carried the wisdom of someone who had spent decades navigating systems designed to exclude people like them. "Sarah, when you were in nursing school, you came home crying after your first clinical rotation because one of the instructors told you that you didn't have the right personality for nursing. Do you remember what I told you then?" Sarah smiled despite her anxiety. "You told me that some people would always try to make me smaller because they were threatened by my potential, and that my job was to prove them wrong by being exactly who I was meant to be. And what happened? I graduated at the top of my class and got hired at one of the best hospitals in the city." Elena nodded. "And now another person is trying to tell you that you don't belong somewhere. Except this time, it's your own voice doing the telling. This Mr. Hartwell, he didn't offer you this job because he felt sorry for you or because he wanted to do charity. He offered it because he saw something in you that convinced him you were the right person for it." She reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. "You have been fighting for your patients and your profession for 3 years, even when it cost you personally. You have been proving yourself over and over again to people who were never going to accept you no matter what you did. Now you have a chance to fight for families like ours, to create the kind of healthcare system we always wished existed when you and your siblings were growing up." The truth of her mother's words hit Sarah like a physical force. She had been so conditioned to doubt her own worthiness, so accustomed to being made to feel like an outsider, that she had almost talked herself out of an opportunity that could benefit not just her own family, but countless others who had been marginalized by the healthcare system.
"What if I fail, Mama?" "Then you fail while trying to do something important," Elena replied without hesitation. "But Sarah, what if you succeed? What if you create something beautiful that helps families like ours access the kind of care you've always provided? What if you prove that excellence in healthcare doesn't require abandoning compassion or forgetting where you came from?" That afternoon, Sarah drove to the South Side to visit Mercy General Hospital. The building was smaller and older than St. Mary's, its brick facade showing the wear of decades of serving one of Chicago's most underserved communities. The parking lot was filled with older cars and pickup trucks rather than luxury sedans, and the waiting room buzzed with conversations in Spanish, Polish, and Arabic as families from the neighborhood's diverse immigrant communities sought care for their loved ones. But despite the building's age and the obvious budget constraints, Sarah could see signs of recent investment and care. The floors were spotless, the walls had been freshly painted, and the staff she observed seemed genuinely engaged with their patients rather than simply going through the motions. She introduced herself to the current director of nursing, an older woman named Margaret O'Brien, who had been holding the position on an interim basis since the previous director's retirement 6 months earlier. Margaret gave Sarah a comprehensive tour of the facility, explaining both the challenges they faced and the improvements that had been implemented since William Hartwell's acquisition of the hospital. "We're not St. Mary's," Margaret said frankly as they walked through the pediatric ward, "and we never will be in terms of resources or prestige. But what we have here is something special, a staff that really cares about the patients, and a community that treats this place like family." Sarah could see what Margaret meant. The nurses she met were diverse in background, but united in their commitment to providing quality care despite limited resources. They spoke passionately about their patients, knew families by name, and had developed creative solutions to work around budget constraints and equipment limitations. Mr. Hartwell has been asking for input on who should take over as permanent director of nursing, Margaret continued. We've all been wondering who he had in mind. I have to say, when he mentioned your name, there were some raised eyebrows. Not because anyone doubted your qualifications, but because we couldn't understand why someone with your reputation would want to leave St. Mary's for a place like this. My reputation? Sarah asked, surprised. Margaret smiled. Honey, you think the nursing community in Chicago is that big? Word gets around about nurses who go above and beyond for their patients, especially when they do it despite facing challenges from their own colleagues. We've all heard about your work in pediatrics and your advocacy for families who need extra support. The compliment meant more to Sarah than she could express. The idea that her efforts had been noticed and respected by nurses throughout the city, that she had earned a reputation based on her patient care rather than her credentials or connections, filled her with a sense of professional pride she had rarely experienced. As the tour continued, Sarah found herself falling in love with Mercy General in a way she had never connected with St. Mary's. The hospital felt alive with purpose and community, a place where healthcare was seen as a human right rather than a luxury commodity. She could envision herself not just working there, but building something transformative that would serve as a model for community-based healthcare. By the time she drove home that evening, Sarah's decision was made. She spent the weekend talking through the details with her mother and siblings, researching the challenges and opportunities of community healthcare, and mentally preparing herself for a career change that would challenge every assumption she had ever made about her own potential. On Monday morning, she called William Hartwell's personal number and accepted his offer. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of transition planning, meetings with healthcare administrators, and intense preparation for her new role. Sarah gave her notice at St. Mary's, enduring a mixture of congratulations, envy, and skepticism from her colleagues. Dr. Blackwood had indeed been terminated, and the incident had prompted a hospital-wide review of professional conduct policies that would hopefully prevent similar situations in the future. But the real change began on Sarah's first day as Director of Nursing at Mercy General. Walking into the hospital wearing a new set of professional attire that she had purchased with part of Hartwell's gift, she felt a sense of purpose and belonging that had been missing throughout her years at St. Mary's. Her first staff meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m. in the hospital's small conference room, and Sarah had spent hours preparing her remarks. She wanted to strike the right balance between acknowledging the challenges ahead and inspiring her team to embrace the vision of excellence that she and William Hartwell shared. As the nursing staff filed into the room, Sarah saw faces that reflected the diversity of the community they served, young and old, representing various ethnic backgrounds and levels of experience, but united by their commitment to caring for patients who had often been overlooked by the broader healthcare system. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through her veins. "I know some of you are wondering who I am and what changes I might bring to Mercy General. I want to start by telling you a little about my background and why I'm so excited to be here." She spoke about her upbringing in Chicago's immigrant communities, her experience navigating the healthcare system as both a patient's family member and a healthcare professional, and her vision for creating an environment where excellent patient care and genuine compassion would be the standard rather than the exception. "I'm not here to criticize what you've been doing or to impose changes for the sake of change," Sarah continued. "What I saw during my visit last week was a team of dedicated professionals who already understand the heart of what nursing should be.
My job is to support you, to advocate for the resources you need, and to help create systems that allow your compassion and skills to flourish. One of the older nurses, a woman named Dorothy who had worked at Mercy General for 15 years, raised her hand. Ms. Martinez, we appreciate your kind words, but we've heard promises before. What makes you different from the administrators who came before you? It was a fair question, and Sarah had expected it. She took a moment to consider her response, wanting to be honest about the challenges ahead while also conveying her genuine commitment to making a difference.
"Dorothy, you're absolutely right to be skeptical," Sarah said. "Administrators have made promises before and failed to follow through. The only way I can prove that I'm different is through my actions over time. But I can tell you this, I've been in your shoes. I've worked nights and weekends caring for patients while feeling unvalued and unsupported by leadership. I've seen how the system fails families who need health care the most, and I've experienced what it's like to be dismissed because of my background." She paused, making eye contact with various members of the staff. "I'm not here because I climbed some corporate ladder or because I have connections in high places. I'm here because Mr. Hartwell saw something in my patient care that convinced him I could help build something special. And I'm here because I believe that healthcare should be a source of healing and hope for everyone, regardless of their ability to pay or their zip code." Another nurse, a young man named Carlos, who couldn't have been much older than Sarah herself, leaned forward in his chair. "What kind of changes are you planning? Are we going to lose staff or have our responsibilities increased without additional support?" "Actually, quite the opposite," Sarah replied, feeling more confident as the conversation continued. "Mr. Hartwell has approved budget increases for nursing staff, equipment upgrades, and professional development opportunities. We're going to be hiring additional nurses, not reducing staff, and we're going to be investing in training and education to help everyone advance in their careers." The room buzzed with surprised murmurs. Budget increases were rare in community hospitals, and the promise of additional resources was almost too good to believe. "Furthermore," Sarah continued, "we're going to be implementing new patient care protocols that prioritize family engagement and cultural sensitivity. We're going to create programs that help patients navigate insurance and financial assistance options. And we're going to establish partnerships with community organizations to provide wraparound services that address the social and economic factors that affect health outcomes." As she outlined her vision for the hospital's future, Sarah could see the skepticism in the room gradually giving way to cautious optimism. These were nurses who had chosen to work in community healthcare despite lower salaries and limited resources because they believed in the mission of serving underserved populations. The possibility of being able to do that work with adequate support and resources was energizing in a way that Sarah found infectious. The meeting concluded with assignments and timeline discussions, but the real measure of its success came afterward, when individual staff members approached Sarah to share their own ideas and concerns. Dorothy, the nurse who had initially challenged her, stayed after everyone else had left. "Miss Martinez," Dorothy said, her tone softer than it had been during the meeting, "I hope you understand why some of us are cautious about new leadership. We've seen administrators come in with big promises and good intentions, only to be constrained by budget realities and corporate priorities." "I absolutely understand," Sarah replied, "and I want you to hold me accountable to the commitments I've made. If you see me making decisions that don't align with our stated values, or if you feel like I'm not advocating effectively for staff and patients, I want you to call me on it." Dorothy smiled for the first time since Sarah had met her. "I think I'm going to like working with you. You remind me of why I went into nursing in the first place."
The compliment stayed with Sarah throughout her first week in the position, as she navigated the complex challenges of healthcare administration while trying to maintain her connection to direct patient care. She made a point of spending time on the floors, talking with patients and families, observing the delivery of care, and identifying areas where improvements could be made. What she found both inspired and concerned her. The nursing staff was indeed dedicated and compassionate, providing excellent care despite resource constraints and systemic obstacles. But she also saw signs of burnout, frustration with bureaucratic inefficiencies, and missed opportunities to serve patients more effectively. The real test came during her second week, when a crisis in the emergency department required all hands on deck. A multi-car accident on the nearby interstate had brought several critically injured patients to Mercy General, straining the hospital's capacity and testing everyone's ability to provide care under pressure. Sarah found herself working alongside the nursing staff, using skills she hadn't exercised since her days as a floor nurse, while simultaneously coordinating resources and communication between departments. In the controlled chaos of the emergency response, she saw the best of what Mercy General represented. Healthcare professionals working together seamlessly to save lives, regardless of the patient's ability to pay or their social status. When the crisis had passed and all patients had been stabilized or transferred to facilities with specialized trauma capabilities, Sarah gathered the exhausted staff for a brief debriefing. What she saw in their faces was the same satisfaction she had felt after particularly challenging shifts at St. Mary's, the deep fulfillment that comes from knowing you've made a real difference in someone's life. Tonight, you all demonstrated why community hospitals like Mercy General are so essential, Sarah told the assembled team. You provided world-class emergency care to people who might not have survived if they had to be transported to a more distant facility. You worked together as a team, supporting each other and advocating for your patients in exactly the way healthcare should work. Carlos, the young nurse who had questioned her during the staff meeting, looked up from the patient chart he was completing. "Ms. Martinez, you were right there with us. You didn't just coordinate from an office, you got your hands dirty and helped take care of patients. I've never seen a director of nursing do that before." "That's because I'm a nurse first and an administrator second," Sarah replied. "My job is to support you in providing excellent patient care, not to separate myself from the work that brought all of us into this profession." As the weeks turned into months, Sarah began to see the culture at Mercy General evolve in ways that exceeded even her optimistic expectations. The additional staff and resources that William Hartwell had promised materialized, allowing nurses to spend more time with individual patients and reducing the stress and burnout that had plagued the department. The professional development programs she implemented helped staff members advance their skills and take on new responsibilities, creating career pathways that had previously been unavailable in community healthcare settings. But perhaps most importantly, the reputation of Mercy General began to change throughout the surrounding neighborhoods. Families who had previously viewed the hospital as a last resort began to see it as their preferred choice for health care, drawn by stories of compassionate care and cultural sensitivity that spread through community networks. The transformation didn't go unnoticed in Chicago's broader healthcare community. Other hospital administrators began visiting Mercy General to observe their patient care models and staff development programs. Sarah found herself invited to speak at nursing conferences and healthcare symposiums, sharing the lessons learned from their community-based approach to medical care. Take a moment to think about the power of believing in someone's potential, even when others can't see it. What impact could we have if we looked beyond superficial judgments and recognized the talent and dedication that exists in unexpected places? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like this video if Sarah's journey has inspired you. The most meaningful recognition came 6 months after Sarah had taken the position, when William Hartwell visited Mercy General for a comprehensive review of their progress. He spent an entire day touring the facility, talking with staff and patients, and reviewing the performance metrics that had improved dramatically under Sarah's leadership. "Ms. Martinez," Hartwell said as they concluded their meeting in Sarah's small but efficient office, "I want you to know that this hospital has exceeded every expectation I had when I offered you this position. Patient satisfaction scores have increased by 40%, staff turnover has dropped to nearly zero, and our financial performance has improved despite the additional investments we've made." Sarah felt a flush of pride, but she was quick to deflect credit to her team. "Mr. Hartwell, these results are a reflection of the incredible nursing staff and the support you've provided. All I did was create an environment where their existing talents could flourish." "That's exactly what leadership is supposed to do," Hartwell replied. "And it's why I have another proposal for you." Sarah looked at him with curiosity, wondering what new challenge or opportunity he might be considering. "I'm planning to expand the Mercy General model to 3 additional community hospitals in Chicago and Milwaukee," Hartwell explained. "I'd like you to serve as Chief Nursing Officer for the entire network, overseeing the development of nursing excellence programs across all 4 facilities." The offer was both exciting and daunting. The opportunity to impact healthcare delivery on a larger scale, to create systems that could serve even more underserved communities, was exactly the kind of work Sarah had dreamed of doing. But it would also mean taking on responsibilities that would test every leadership skill she had developed and some she hadn't yet acquired. It would mean more travel, more administrative responsibilities, and the challenge of replicating what we've built here in very different community contexts, Hartwell continued. But it would also mean the opportunity to influence healthcare policy at the state and national levels, to serve as an advocate for community-based care models, and to mentor other nurses who have the potential to become transformational leaders. Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from being humiliated in front of her colleagues at St. Mary's General to being offered a position of influence that could affect healthcare delivery for thousands of families throughout the Midwest. The contrast seemed almost surreal, a reminder of how dramatically life could change when someone was willing to look beyond surface appearances and recognize underlying potential. "Mr. Hartwell," she said finally, "I'm honored by your confidence in me, and I'm excited about the possibility of expanding our model to serve more communities. But I want to make sure we don't lose what makes Mercy General special in our eagerness to grow too quickly. What do you have in mind?" "I'd like to take the Chief Nursing Officer position, but I want to maintain my base here at Mercy General," Sarah explained. "I want to continue working directly with patients and families, continue mentoring the nursing staff here, and use this hospital as a laboratory for developing new approaches that we can then implement in the other facilities." Hartwell smiled, and Sarah could see approval in his expression. "Ms. Martinez, that's exactly the kind of thinking that convinced me you were the right person for this work. You understand that leadership isn't about moving away from the front lines. It's about remaining connected to the work that matters while creating systems that allow others to succeed." As they shook hands on the agreement, Sarah found herself thinking about all the people who had contributed to her journey. Her mother, whose sacrifices had made her education possible. the patients and families who had taught her the true meaning of healthcare, the nursing colleagues at Mercy General who had embraced her vision and worked tirelessly to implement it, and even the doctors at St. Mary's who had inadvertently provided the catalyst for her career transformation. But most of all, she thought about William Hartwell, whose decision to look beyond her appearance and circumstances had changed not just her life, but the lives of countless patients and healthcare workers who would benefit from the systems they were building together. That evening, Sarah drove home through the same neighborhoods she had traveled as a struggling staff nurse, but everything looked different now. The community health clinic where her family had received care during her childhood was now partnered with Mercy General to provide seamless transitions between primary and specialty care. The pharmacy, where they had struggled to afford prescriptions, now participated in a discount program she had helped develop. The apartment buildings where families like hers lived paycheck to paycheck now had residents who could access quality health care without choosing between medical care and other necessities. The transformation wasn't complete. There was still work to be done, systems to improve, and barriers to overcome. But for the first time in her life, Sarah felt like she was in a position to address those challenges with the resources and authority necessary to make a real difference. When she pulled into the parking lot of her family's new apartment, a spacious 3-bedroom unit in a much better neighborhood that she had been able to afford thanks to her new salary, Sarah sat in her car for a moment, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The check that William Hartwell had given her that night at St. Mary's General was now framed and hanging in her office at Mercy General, not as a symbol of charity received, but as a reminder of the moment when someone had chosen to see her potential rather than her limitations. It represented the power of recognition, the importance of looking beyond surface judgments, and the transformative impact that could result when people in positions of authority chose to use their influence to lift others up rather than tear them down. But more than that, it represented the beginning of a story that was still being written. A story about the kind of healthcare system that was possible when compassion and excellence were not seen as competing values, but as complementary forces that could transform communities and save lives. As Sarah walked toward her family's new home, where her mother was waiting with dinner and her siblings were eager to hear about her day, she carried with her the satisfaction of work well done and the excitement of challenges yet to come. She had become living proof that talent and dedication could overcome prejudice and limited opportunities, that healthcare could be both excellent and accessible, and that sometimes the most unlikely people could become the most transformational leaders. The story that had begun with humiliation and discrimination had evolved into one of triumph and purpose, but Sarah knew it was far from over. Every day brought new opportunities to advocate for underserved communities, to mentor other healthcare professionals who felt marginalized by traditional hierarchies, and to prove that the American dream was still possible for those willing to work for it and lucky enough to encounter someone who believed in their potential. Years later, when Sarah would speak to nursing students or healthcare administrators about her career journey, she would always return to the lessons of that night at St. Mary's General. She would talk about the importance of maintaining dignity in the face of discrimination, the power of persistent excellence even when it goes unrecognized, and the transformational impact that can result when people in positions of authority choose to use their influence to create opportunities rather than perpetuate barriers. But most importantly, she would remind her audiences that every interaction with a patient, every moment of compassion shown to a worried family member, every act of professional excellence performed regardless of recognition, has the potential to change lives in ways that might never be fully known or appreciated. Healthcare, she learned, was not just about treating medical conditions. It was about treating people with dignity, respect, and hope, regardless of their circumstances or ability to pay. The Millionaire hospital owner's unexpected response to witnessing workplace discrimination had created ripple effects that extended far beyond a single career change or even a single hospital transformation. It had demonstrated the power of principled leadership, the importance of creating inclusive healthcare environments, and the tremendous potential that exists within communities that have been historically underserved by the medical establishment. And for Sarah Martinez, it had provided the opportunity to become the kind of healthcare leader she had always dreamed of being. One who never forgot where she came from, who never stopped advocating for those who couldn't advocate for themselves, and who proved every day that excellence in healthcare requires both technical competence and genuine compassion. If this story of transformation, resilience, and the power of seeing potential in unexpected places has moved you, please share it with others who might need to hear that their circumstances don't define their destiny. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that remind us of the dignity and potential that exists in every human being. And stay tuned for our next video, where we'll explore another remarkable tale of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Remember, sometimes the most profound changes begin with a single person choosing to see others not as they appear, but as they could become.